So let's take a closer look at how gender socialization can actually contribute to systems of inequality, specifically gender inequalities. Let's take a look at Barbie. Barbie is an iconic toy specifically designed for young girls, and Barbie has stereotypically been used as this kind of example of how toys that are gendered produce gender norms from a very young age that children come to internalize, right? So, for example, what norms does Barbie portray? Well, she's always got a cute outfit on. She's always got a beat mug, wearing, dolled up face all the time, lots of makeup, very feminine clothing, long hair, very skinny, right? Very petite, but still curvaceous in the spots that places that women are expected to be. In kind of an unrealistic body proportion, which we'll take a closer look at in just a minute here, right? But so Barbie portrays a lot of norms, right? She's physically, the beauty standards of what a woman is supposed to look like definitely communicates that to young girls in our society, and also through the careers that Barbie is expected to have, teaching young girls that they can be exposed to different lines of work. Let's start with what Barbie's physical beauty actually communicates to young women. There's been a lot of criticism, especially in recent years, that the unrealistic body proportions of Barbie cause young girls to develop body dysmorphia, right? For example, a few years ago, a college student actually did a project to better understand what Barbie would look like if she was an actual human being. So this young woman in the picture up here actually developed an eating disorder, and she said a large reason that attributed to her eating disorder was that she grew up playing with Barbies and she never understood why her body didn't look like Barbie's did. And it caused her to produce this project to make this life-size version of Barbie. And her actual dimensions are pretty ridiculous here. She'd be something like over 6 feet tall, but have like an 18-inch waist, but still like a triple D breast, large hips, long, freakishly long arms and legs, like realistically not human body proportions, right? Physically impossible for a human body to be in those proportions without being in some way surgically altered, right? So this fact that we've for decades now looked up at Barbie as being this kind of beauty and fashion icon that we give to young girls, we might not even be realizing the negative consequences or the negative effects that socializing young women to not only play with but also admire and look up to Barbie could have on their self-development, right? So not only does Barbie represent unrealistic expectations, she also before was really restricted to this kind of one note character, right? Her only job was to stay at home, to take care of the children, her little sisters, whoever. And she started getting a little flack for that. So the creators decided that, hey, we can show Barbie going out into the working world, to be up with the times. Women don't just have to stay home and cook and clean anymore. They can go out and get jobs too. But even when Barbie got to go out and get jobs, she still was this hyper feminine character, right? These are a few of my favorites. This first one here displays Barbie as either a zookeeper or a veterinarian, a zoologist, something of that sort, right? So good for Barbie for getting out into the medical field. But notice that, look at what she's wearing. I mean, have you ever seen a zookeeper wearing like 6-inch hot pink platinum pumps and then this weird, kind of crop top jacket? I mean, obviously this is not what you would see a typical zookeeper or zoologist wearing. And then interestingly, and then the hair and makeup, flowing and beautiful like this, definitely not typical for someone who's going to be working with animals, sweating, running around a lot. Mucking around through the mud in these shoes is ridiculous. But what's also interesting is that even when Barbie becomes a zoologist, she still only seems to be allowed to work with the baby zoo animals, right? So still kind of paying homage to this idea that women are expected to be, again, mothers and nurturers and caregivers before they can engage in any other type of behaviors. Barbie is a baker. Again, ridiculous outfit. I've worked in the restaurant industry for over a decade of my life. I've never seen someone in a kitchen wearing anything even remotely close to this. I guarantee you these shoes are not slip resistant. So breaking the law there. And again, wearing makeup, having hair down in a kitchen, definitely a no-no. And again, Barbie can't even apparently be a cook or, a chef on the line. She can be a baker, though, which, again, is kind of a softer form of this profession where we typically associate chefs with being men. Women can do baking because it's seen as, again, more matronly, more motherly, etc. And then lastly here, Barbie is a doctor. And again, I mean, these same criticisms get applied here. I in my 30 years of life going to a doctor, I've never seen a doctor wear a hot pink skirt into the office or wear hot pink, high heel shoes, having again the hair flowing, full makeup, the cinched in waist, a lab coat that's cinched in at the waist with a hot pink belt. I mean, just exuding this hyper femininity. And then again, beyond that, here Barbie, even as a doctor, needs to be either a pediatrician or an obstetrician, can only work with babies, is not talented or skilled enough to actually be a doctor for grown people. Oh, and the cute little pink heart on the stethoscope. I mean, just very hyper feminine portrayals of women in these careers, instead of just letting Barbie be a typical average woman exploring the workforce in all of the ways that they should have access to. Another one of my favorites, this is a bit of a throwback, right? Barbie can still take on some manly careers. This one is Barbie as a police officer. But what do you notice? I mean, take a look specifically at the packaging for this particular Barbie as a police officer. And if you look closely, you'll see that even though Barbie has her typical, the kind of masculine or standard police officer uniform on with the extremely, again, cinched and tight waist and the flowing hair, that doesn't seem very safe. She also, though, police officer Barbie comes equipped with this gold sparkly cocktail dress so she can still hit the town with her girls after a long day out, patrolling the streets. She can brush her hair with her comb, put on her dress, and go out and be pretty. Another thing I find super interesting with this particular Barbie is that police officer Barbie comes with safety tips, right? Presumably because she's a woman, she needs to know how to protect herself in a way that men don't need to, right? I guarantee you that not a single one of my G.I. Joes that I played with growing up ever came with a safety manual, right? They were expected to be in dangerous situations, and that was normative because they're the masculine action figures. But even when a woman, in this case iconic Barbie, gets put in a position where she could potentially be in danger, we expect women to need a leg up to protect themselves because they're not expected to be skilled or trained in the same ways that men and the action figures that boys played with are, right? Also, movies are an excellent source of gender socialization that we can take a closer look at. I love Disney, don't get me wrong, grew up watching Disney movies, but it was a very familiar scene in every Disney movie that I grew up with to see the princess at some point or another collapsed in a puddle of their own tears. Woe is me. Because again, women get portrayed in this kind of stereotypically negative light, that women are overly emotional, that they're weak, that they're in need of saving, right? In all of these movies, all of these female characters, these princesses, were dependent on a prince or some man to come in and swoop them off their feet and save the day, which again provides this kind of subliminal message to especially young women that women are fragile, that they need a man in order to be successful or to solve whatever problems that they're facing. And think of how, again, negative, how deleterious that can be to young women in our society, to be socialized from a young age to expect that it's normative for women to be dependent on men, that women can't be independent on themselves, that women always resort to falling to their knees and crying when things get hard, right? Not to negatively stereotype having emotions and crying in general, but it's a double standard because you never once see a prince fall to their knees and cry in a Disney movie, right? Never once. Unless it's being the only time you'd see a male character crying is if it's a joke, right? Oh, look at that wuss, look at that sissy, right? He's a man and he's crying. It's meant to be a punchline in the movie if you ever see one crying, right? And so think of these subliminal messages that we send to young boys and young girls, right? To boys that it's their job to be strong and to save women, and to women, to young girls, that it's their job to be emotional and that it's okay for them to be dependent on men because we can always expect men to come in and save the day. Right, so these, again, when you watch these movies as a child or when you play with these toys as children, that's probably not the first thought in your mind, right? And when you're buying these toys or showing these movies to your children or your nieces or nephews or the kids you babysit, you're probably not thinking about the negative messages that can be conveyed through these toys and through these movies. But research has consistently shown that these messages are picked up very clearly at a young age, right? Again, think back to that video we watched on gender socialization, at how young of an age little kids are able to say, that doll goes out and works, that doll stays home and takes care of the kids, right? And they learn those messages not because their parents or their friends or their aunts and uncles told them, hey, women are viewed as being weaker and dependent on men, and men are viewed as being stronger and the ones that should take care of the families. They learn those messages through these sneaky acts of gender socialization, specifically through media like this. So what does gender socialization do? Well, it does have some good aspects to it. It's not all negative. Gender socialization does help us develop a gender identity, which refers to a person's deeply held internal perception of his or her gender. An individual's gender identity can be the same as the sex that you were assigned at birth, but it can also be different than the sex that you were assigned at birth. So a lot of people will grow up and identify with the gender that they were assigned at their birth, right? If the doctor said you were male, you were likely socialized from a young age to act very masculine, and to identify as a man, and many people will. However, a number of people at some point in their lives no longer identify with the sex that they were assigned at birth, and this refers to transgender, right? So a person who is transgender is someone who no longer identifies with the gender that they were assigned at birth. The terms transsexual and transvestite are dated. Also, you should never refer to a person as transgendered. That's also an offensive term. The term transgender is what we want to use, right? So a person is transgender, or trans for shorthand is also socially acceptable if the person no longer assigns with the gender that they were, if the person no longer identifies with the gender that they were assigned at birth. The terms trans man, and trans woman are all also socially acceptable. But again, transsexual, transvestite, we don't want to say those anymore. And neither do we ever want to refer to a person as transgendered. Or you also never want to say, I know a transgender, right? You don't know a transgender, you know a transgender person, or you know a trans man or a trans woman, okay? Gender identities are individual choices. So this is an important aspect, right? While we are often forced into a gender at birth that's beyond our control, as we grow up and start to better understand who we are and what we resonate with in terms of gender norms and gendered expectations, we as individuals get to choose what our gender identity is. Okay, so this is really important. We should never assume that we know a person's gender or identity. Instead, we should be asking them. And that's why, if you remember back on the first day of class when I had you write out those nameplates, I asked you to let us know as a class, what gender pronouns do you use? Do you want to go by he, him, his, she, her, hers, the individual or singular form of they, them, their? There's different pronouns that we can use to respect people's gender identities and to respect that every individual has the choice to choose how they want to identify in terms of their gender. So it can be harmful and problematic if we just make assumptions. We think, oh, that person looks like a dude, so I'm going to assume I can call him he. It's a lot easier if we just ask people, and it's socially respectful as well. You might think that seems trivial, but I guarantee you, if you ever know someone who identifies either as trans or non-binary, or chooses to present masculine or feminine, if that doesn't line up with the way that they're typically sexually categorized, if you go out of the way to ask people how they choose to identify, they're going to appreciate it, right? So it's always a good practice to do that with everyone. What are some problems gender socialization can produce for our society? I'm not going to talk much about this here because I have a mini lecture specifically talking about gender inequalities in the context of work, but that's where women really get hit hard with gender socialization. These images portrayed to young girls that they are expected to be homemakers, that they have these responsibilities specific to them, that they need to take care of children, has really negative consequences for women today in the workforce. Women today get paid less, they're considered less for promotions and raises, and what research consistently shows is that it's not because women are incompetent workers or that they're not as valuable as men in the workforce, but it's because bosses, employers have these gendered biases. They think women are going to be inferior workers because they have extra work that they need to do at home. So we'll talk more about that. Also have another presentation just on the social problems caused by masculinity in our society. We live in a society that teaches boys they need to be tough, they can't ask for help, and as a result, it has a lot of negative effects on their overall health, both mental health and physical health. And I'll go over a lot of these specific statistics and examples in that presentation on masculinity. Lastly, I just want to talk about how gender socialization can reduce gender inequalities. Well, we can start producing agents of socialization, things like toys and media, that challenge the unrealistic expectations that a lot of older toys and movies have put out. For example, a lot of toy makers are now starting to produce dolls that actually resemble people's bodies in normal ways and not in these weird, funky ways that Barbie does that are really unrealistic. And also, we can start producing more gender neutral toys. Target recently got rid of boy toy aisles and girl toy aisles, and they just have toy aisles now to let it know that it's okay if you're a boy and you want to play with a toy that's typically referred to as a girl's toy and vice versa. And in fact, science proves that this is an effective way at encouraging people to endorse gender neutrality.